Here's a story about my dad. My dad worked at Jackson State University in the 70s and the 80s, Dr. Grover D. Barnes. And here is what I remember about this story. He and some of his friends, of all things, got in bass boats and with motors that you steer with your hand, went from Biloxi or Gulfport out to Horn Island. We're talking about several miles out to the Barrier Islands. And apparently they got out partial, keep in mind that there wasn't the Weather Channel in the 70s or the 80s. You would kind of think, well, why did he even do this if there was any possibility of bad weather? But apparently, somehow on the way out to the island, 7 or 8 miles, we're talking about a motorboat, they were all of a sudden on 6 to 10 foot waves. They were going up waves, they were going up the side of waves and down waves that were longer than their boat. By the time they got to Horn Island, which is I think what their destination was, everything they had was soaked and wet, and they were trying to pull stuff back in the boat. I don't even honestly, I think they felt like they were lucky that they got there alive. They threw up tents, they threw up shelters, but because everything they had was wet, there weren't any dry clothes. And so apparently my dad, who probably in the 70s, he would have been in his mid-30s then, he and a lot of the other people did not have enough clothing. And they were wearing shorts and whatever they could find that would dry out, because trying to live in clothing that's saltwater soaked is not very pleasant. And so apparently they stayed out on the island for several days. And of course there was no cell service, there was nothing, nobody, none of us, my mom, none of us sisters, we didn't know of anything, there was anything wrong. But apparently my dad came back with blisters on the top of his feet from the sun exposure that he got. That was kind of the result of this trauma. And I can just remember him coming back from this trip and being bedridden. My dad was not that kind of a guy. My dad was an outdoorsman, and he was sick for several days. I think he stayed in the bed for a while and just recovered. Now, the other story that I wanted to tell you along with this is some of his friends told about spearfishing in this area around the Bay of Biloxi. And one day he tells one story about one of his friends that had a whole stringer of fish that he had speared, and a big hammerhead came up behind him in that murky water and was hitting that stringer of fish. And he had to make the decision, I've spent all this time harvesting this stuff, and he just let it go. He said, I'm not gonna hold this stringer of fish and be the next bite that this shark experiences. And so one of the things that my dad also said was the danger for shark attack is waist deep or less. And a lot of times the people get hit and they're like, they're with other people and they're like, man, why did you hit me so hard? And then not realizing that a chunk of their thigh is now missing. And so what these sharks do is they can't really tell what you are. They sense you, they pop you and try to see if they like what they are tasting, and then maybe go back for more or not. And that's why some people, a lot of times, they'll just get bit once, make it back to the shore, and they're fine. They don't keep getting hit over and over like some do. Anyhow, those are some stories of Dr. Grover D. Barnes from the 1970s.